Hi, John. I hope this email finds you well. As a single mother and visible minority with a compromised credit history, I had to file a consumer proposal due to an exorbitant divorce. I believe I would be the perfect target for Key Living. I literally just learned about this company today. Now, John, as aside for our audience, you've recently written about what Key Living is, and I'll leave it to you in your response to really unpack what this company does. But for now, suffice it to say that it's described as a co-ownership model to help buyers get onto the property market. So
Mhm.
let's now return to or get into the property market. Let's return to our emailer's question. So she goes on to write, I'm very interested in entering into one of their condos in the Distillery District, and that's in downtown Toronto, just on the east side. And in trying to do more research on it, I came across your article. I have a ton of questions, such as can I get an ironclad contract from the company that states that I can transition to eventually own the property outright, and whether this type of co-ownership would enable me to still qualify for first-time homebuyer status. And I presume that means for various government and other incentive schemes. My instinct is to contact a lawyer, but I don't have a lot of money for their fees right now. So I'm interested in hearing what you think. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Warm regards, Yara.
Interesting question. So I wrote about this company, I don't even know how, maybe like 2 years ago. Uh,
So that we're calling that recent. So it's not really that recent.
Not that recent, I don't think. So I'll unpack, and I haven't researched them since then. I don't think their business model has changed very much, but I'll kind of unpack at a high level what they do or what they were doing, and I'm pretty sure it sounds like it's the same thing. They're basically marketing their company as a co-ownership business model, right? So rather than needing a 5 or 7% down payment for a home and needing to have excellent credit and excellent, income and all of these things to buy a property, you don't have to worry about all of that stuff. You only need a 2.5% down payment. Okay. So just a small amount. And they'll kind of overlook poor credit history. Doesn't really matter. But if you have a 2.5% down payment, they say you are become a co-owner of a unit, right? And you are investing to have a share of that home. Like you co-own it with the main owner. And I can't remember what the share is like. Maybe your 2.5% down payment buys you a 2.5% share or 4% share, something like that. You own a small part of it, whereas if you're a first time buyer, you put down your 7, 8%, you own 100% of the property, right? You obviously have a mortgage, but you own 100%. In this model, you don't own 100%, you own like a small percent. Now, there are a few things with this. I mean, at the time, it's kind of misleading. You're actually not an owner. Like to be an owner, you need to be on title. You are a registered owner. So they're not owners. I mean, effectively what this business does is, and what I said at the time, they're kind of preying on, this person who said, like, I'm a key target. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. They usually prey on people who really want a home but can't qualify, right? And they're mislead them into thinking they're homeowners when they're not. And really what they do is they tie up this big deposit. They call it a deposit or down payment, which is effectively like the equivalent to like 6 months rent. Um, and make you feel like you're a homeowner and you're invested. And what they'll tell you is, well, if the unit goes up 5% a year, then you get that gain. But you get they're effectively giving you 5% on your deposit, your 6 months rent up front. So it's kind of like they're paying you interest, but they call it a capital gain. And what they're doing, I think it's kind of misleading because even at the time, it's like they were encouraging people to fix up the units because they make you feel like an owner so you can paint it and fix it and maintain it and it's yours and you're investing in it, and they're tapping into this like emotional component of having a home of your own and fixing it. And they'll tell you, don't worry, everything that you invest, you get all of the upsides to those improvements. You want to change the floors? No problem. Whatever the improvement of the value is, you get that, right? again, this is all misleading because anyone who has been in real estate knows if I spend 10 grand fixing on my home, it does not improve the value of my home by 10 grand. It does not improve the value of my home by 15 or 20 grand. It only improves the value of a home by maybe 5 grand. Like most improvements, you do not get a return on. Most people think you get a return on investment, but you generally don't. Like your biggest return on investment are usually kitchen and baths, and even those are like 70 cents for every dollar you spend, for example, right? So again, they're effectively kind of getting people to fix the investor's unit on the what is effectively the tenant's dying, right? Um, it's also a way to get around landlord's tenant laws. You know what they're basically have are tenants who have a bigger down payment that the investor has to pay a slightly higher interest on. And if they ever stop paying the rent, they have way more collateral and can kick them out a lot easier than if they were just a tenant, right? So this is why I think it's not great. It's again, it's not entirely honest. And like to this idea of like, can you, and part of their pitch is, well, you can eventually buy that unit. I mean, do you really want to buy that unit in the future? I mean, out of all the thousands of units that are on the market, do you need to buy that one? And the challenge again is, I mean, at least when I looked at stuff a while ago, what they were doing, it's the question is who gets your 6 month rent deposit, this co-ownership, this down payment, they call it, right? Is it secured? Who is responsible for that? I think it's the investor. So you basically have this agreement with this investor. Who has the leverage in this negotiation? Is this third party company Key going to come in and represent you and protect your interests, or are they just going to say it's not my problem? You two sort it out, right? And I think they do the latter because they don't want to be involved in disputes between them. So it's not a great model. Now, I'm gonna say that it doesn't necessarily mean every co-ownership arrangement is bad. Like a lot of co-ownerships that are good are people just buying homes with friends. Okay. That is a more reasonable co-ownership model because you and two friends, you pool your money together, you know what I mean? You buy a small triplex, you each have one apartment. Collectively, you now have your down payments of 10 or 15%, and you co-own a home together. I mean, again, that has its challenges. I don't want to make it sound like that's perfect, but that is a more reasonable approach to co-owning. Using one of these companies to have a small share of a home. Again, I was not a very big fan of it when they launched. I wrote something pretty critical about them. It's on our blog. We'll add a link in the show notes. But again, not a very good approach. And I should unpack what these companies are doing are basically. So Key is just like a facilitator, but they're basically helping these big corporations who are going out and buying blocks of condos, like 50 in one shot, renting them out, and kind of trying to convince people they're co-owners when they're not. They're just kind of tenants without any of the rights of tenants, right? So they're basically kind of facilitating all of these companies who are just buying big blocks of condominiums. So again, not a great business. I think not something that I would want to be involved in. So I would generally discourage people from these types of decisions.
So interesting. Now, as someone that, like Yara, has spent some time in the rental market, and I've spent a considerable time of it, especially as a professional who's lived in different cities. One of my biggest concerns has always been that I've missed out on the appreciation that people are getting around me,
Yeah.
on their homes or their condos. So, on the surface, it seems like, well, finally, even if I'm a tenant and I don't really have that many rights, at least I get a little bit more of the upside when this condo appreciates now, or this house. Now, I appreciate that you're fixing the bathroom and you don't get all of the returns, but over time, an area like the Distillery District or other areas across Toronto, you would think would see a lot of increase in their value over, let's say, even the 10 years or 15 years you rent there, or 20.
Mhm.
So is it the case that there is no upside to the fact that, like, how is Key offering that appreciation back? Because I think that's what would really attract a
Okay,
lot of
so
people into this.
here's okay, and I think it's a reasonable question. This is, I think, how they seduce people into it. But again, it's a little misleading. Okay, for starters, we are in this or in this world where everyone thinks condo prices go up, everything goes up, and I want to be part of that. I mean, we very well might be in a period where condo prices might dip, right? I'm sure that wasn't part of their marketing package, right? But anyone who follows our show knows listings at an all-time high. So this person might actually see their investment decline, right? Number one. Number two, um, let's just use some simple examples, okay? So you have a $500,000 condo, right? And you are buying it as a first-time buyer, and you put a 5% down payment on it. You put down your $25,000 down payment, right? And you move into it. Now, let's just say that condo goes up 5% in the first year, right? That condo has gone up 25,000. Okay. Now, the thing is, the return on your investment is like 100%. Like if we just ignore transaction costs for a moment, right? Because it is a leveraged investment, right? You put down 5%, you put down 25 grand, but the 5% appreciation you're getting is on the 500,000 value,
So
right?
let's
So
unpack that. When you say that your 5% is buying you 100%
yes, of the
of that
house.
appreciation. And that's what we
100%.
mean by leverage.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
leverage means it's not 5% in, you get 5% back. It's 5% is getting you 100% of what that property's appreciation is getting.
Exactly. So and and
And
again,
that's what makes ownership like your no
th
a regular ownership.
this what makes the exactly like relatively lucrative. Like you know, why the returns have been so strong for people. And again, I'm not advocating high debt. I'm not even suggesting prices always go up 5% per year. We're just using a very simple example to try to unpack the difference, right? And if you do that over 4 or 5 years, you've made 100 grand, for
Yeah,
example.
I mean you're making a very reasonable point, which is I can put $50,000 into my RSP. I all the return I make is on that amount.
On the 50 grand,
What's
exactly.
always made real estate a bit different when you own a property, you're putting a down payment, you're putting down a smaller amount, but you own
Yes.
the all of it. Now, what you're saying is you own the upside appreciation,
Yes.
but you also own the downside.
Exactly, which is why leverage is terrible, right? Like in
Oh.
down markets. So I'm not advocating for high leverage, but the
Mm-hmm.
investors who've been high leverage, who've maxed out on their debt,
Mm-hmm.
are feeling the high rate environment and are certainly more vulnerable. Like, but that's a separate argument. It's not
But if
even
you're in the middle lane, you just, you're not over
right.
leveraged. You're just someone who paid their mortgage over years and years and years. Your point is
Mhm.
that the performance of that property over 20 years,
Yeah.
is quite spectacular considering you put a certain down payment
Hmm.
and that turned into appreciation that can be, you can buy a house for 650K and sell it years later for 2 million. And that's not
Exactly.
being a gambler. That's living in a certain neighborhood in Toronto for 20 years.
100%.
Right. And just paying your mortgage every day. Now,
Yeah.
so I think there is that sense in which that sense of the power of leverage, and you'll
Hmm.
hear late night real estate infomercials talking about the power of leverage,
Hmm.
can kind of suck you in. And what I'm saying is a lot of us fear missing out on that when we're in the rental market for whatever reason, for whatever
Yes.
point of time.
Yeah.
Um, so, but are you saying that somehow the key buyers are not necessarily partaking? I
No.
get that in a down market, you make no leverage and you've renovated the whole house for your landlord and you've seen nothing. But what about the example, like, the distillery is a great area to live in. And what if you rent in the distillery for 15, 20 years? Can a key owner that only owns a certain percentage, how do they see any of that upside, or do they, she talks about an ironclad contract. My
Yeah.
instinct is that the contract is not written in such a way that would see that the co-buyer get the upside.
The co-buyer, the contracts are written to favor the investors. That's who Key's client is. But the broader point is that the person like who emailed us in, when they put down their 2.5 deposit, they are not getting the full capital gain of the full value of the home. Like they're
Right.
not getting that same leverage, right? And I can't remember I think their default is if the market goes up 5%, they get 5% on their deposit. I can put that in a GIC and get 5%. I don't need to invest with these people, right?
Also, John, can I
And
ask one question?
yeah,
What makes property different is when do you realize that? Because you only realize gains after you've owned your home for 20 years and sell it.
or
How does
five,
it work in the Key model
well, I
if you're
don't know.
living in it and you're not selling it?
I haven't looked at, well, again, I haven't looked at it closely, but again, part of this is designed as a co-ownership. One day you can use that money and buy it.
Right.
Or in theory, if you sell it, you can take that money out. I don't know what their transaction costs are and what their fees are.
But you'd have to be very careful. You'd
Yeah,
have to be very careful because what you think you'd be able to buy at the end of 15, 20 years, if your circumstances improve, I have a feeling that what you're saying is you'd have to be really careful to see how much you've actually put in,
yeah,
and you could have put that money in a down payment savings and then in that amount of time go into a property where you have now 100% of the upside.
yeah,
So
exactly.
you have to do the math against where you would have been.
Yeah.
Because even if you are a renter and you're not able to get into the market, kind of similar to the first question, we have to think of the other things you could have done with that money. At the end of the day, you're still doing something with that money.
Mhm.
Even if you're sprucing up your apartment, hoping that it will pay off for you.
Yeah.
All that money, that 5,000 in your kitchen or your bathroom could be in your down payment fund instead,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And you could be living in
100%.
a lower
Rather
cost
than,
rental.
yeah, rather than renovating your landlord's unit
Right,
that they're saying is your co-owned unit, right?
right.
So yeah, again,
Lots to be aware of is what you're saying. Now, a
yeah,
final question I have for you, John, which I even find confusing, even though I've been reporting on and in this industry for so long, is the word co-ownership. I always assume that, condos have that term, implies some kind of all
Mhm.
these unit owners coming together to own a building. Then we hear about co-op buildings,
Mhm.
which you also think are like some kind of cooperative ownership. Then you hear about buying with your family member or maybe friends.
Mhm.
That's co-ownership. So what are the differences? Because there are different models of co-owning a property, clearly.
There are. Okay,
And some
so
are more effective than others, I would assume, in allowing you to partake in that leveraging that you're talking about.
mhm.
And then others less efficient or things that you'd have to be concerned about.
Okay, so we're gonna have a crash course on the history of how properties have been.
Just in our final minute, please.
Okay, so at a high level, okay, before Ontario had condominiums, okay, um, the kind of most common way to build what we call condos today, they were two legal structures at the time: co-ownerships and co-ops, okay, and they're slightly different. With a So imagine like it's a normal condo building, right? But today, if you buy a condo building, you own that unit, right? That is yours. Um, and you are basically also obviously invested in the common elements of the condominium. Okay. Now, when we're building sort of what look like condos, but they're actually co-ownership or co-ops, the legal structure was different. Okay. In a co-ownership building back then, everyone was like a shareholder of the entire building. So you didn't buy your unit, right? Let's just say like the building had 20 units and there are 20 owners. You each had a proportionate share of that entire building.
And if
So
I can interrupt, so let's say you had 10 units, 100 shares, you each have 10. I
yeah, so
mean,
you'd
this
be
is very
yes, you'd
different.
each, for example, a 10% shareholder on that building. So if you looked at the land registry, there would be 10 owners of that building, and you as one of the owners get exclusive use of your apartment. Okay, so you don't own your apartment, you own 10% of all the apartments, but you get exclusive use of yours, right? It's a very muddled way. Co-ownerships a little, sorry, co-ops are a little bit different, where it's actually a corporation that owns all of the units, right? And you are a shareholder in the corporation, right? And you have exclusive use of your unit. And there are a lot of those actually, like in older parts of Toronto and Forest Hill and Rosedale. They're typically quite inexpensive, like on a per square foot basis. Um, for a number of reasons. I mean, sometimes some of them just don't have laundry, so they have shared laundry, and people just obviously don't want that. But also because you need to have like a 35% down payments to buy them, right? They feel like older apartment buildings rather than like what we think of as condos today. But you know, if you have a decent down payment, you can be in a very prime neighborhood for a relatively affordable price.
And
Um,
isn't, and sorry, John, isn't this my understanding that co-ops are now being sort of encouraged again in our housing crisis as a way of, you can set some terms, people can collectively decide, you know, we're going to make it reasonable, keep the monthly fees at a reasonable way, manage this together
So that
collectively.
so the co-ops that our federal government's pushing is a little bit different. I think this is why
Mm-hmm.
all these terms are different. What they're pushing are basically kind of like non-market housing. So
Mm.
these co-ops are market housing, meaning
The older ones, the ones that were constituted
exactly, they're
before
effectively
condos.
condos with a different legal structure,
Right, because
right?
they predated, what you're saying is they predated the modern establishment of a corporation, which is what a
Yes.
condo is short for.
Yes.
A condo stands for the condo corporation. And these are just older structures, but
Yeah.
basically there are some similarities there. This is different from what we're hearing about the new
Yes.
wave of condos, which will be people again buying into units and shared amenities, but maybe along shared goals.
No, generally not buying. What they're talking about, like those cooperatives are non-market rental housing, right? So you actually don't buy it generally. Like that's generally what they're talking about. It is maybe like the government has donated the land, right? So and the property gets built and the units in that development are below market rents, right? And the cooperative, the community, which is basically like a board of residents, manages sort of the co-op and what the rents will be, and they manage the maintenance, but you're not a unit owner.
Understood. So even for a large deposit, because these are also very popular across Europe. So it's not like a small deposit. People are buying in with 30,000, other sums. You are buying for the the right to be a renter, probably for a long amount of time in these shared projects.
Yeah, but I don't even know if they have big deposits. Like I don't know if they don't necessarily, I don't know if they necessarily require
From
a
my understanding from my interview on our channel with Gregor Craigie, if you look at some of the models of
Mhm,
co-op that people are really looking at that are successful in Germany and other places, they're a bit different. There are two types. There's
mhm,
one is the federal model that you're talking about where you're really assisted.
mhm,
And then there's a type where even just a middle, like a market income person is buying
mhm,
it. What I mean by that is you still need some capital to get in.
mhm, mhm,
So anyways, let's not muddle the water. That my understanding from what you're saying is in Canada, we are not really pushing on that.
mhm,
What we're pushing on is a model in which the Canadian government or other municipalities, corporations, nonprofit builders help, or nonprofit runners help people get into long-term rental situations that
mhm.
are more secure.
Exactly.
Because you're governing it together, and they have this mission to kind of keep you into the co-op,
Yeah.
in a way that you can maintain
Mhm,
for more security. So that's a second co-op model that's not to be confused
mhm,
with what you're saying is the older legal way that
mhm.
basically condos were,
Exactly.
instituted. And then you can get into, if you co-owned with a friend or a family member, that's a very
Sure.
specific co-ownership that you would go to
Yeah.
a lawyer, and that could look like all kinds of things, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, and more people are doing that. That's effectively like a partnership. It's like you and two friends are getting together and you're buying a home. And that's like a new way for people to get into the market. Again, people are buying duplexes, triplexes, or whatever it is with another person. as a way to get into the market. I think it's very clever if you can find another person to do that. But yeah, I think that's a smart way to get into the market.
Actually, some of my smartest university friends, I never thought about it because it wasn't a trend then. They
Mm-hmm.
did that.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed them to actually, when they, started their own families, now I recall, they sold their property and had that capital.
Yeah.
But it was a nice property in Little Portugal. None of us thought to do that then.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of us were just renters. But
Yeah.
it's something we haven't thought about. But I guess what I've been trying to dig at is this key model, this key living model. Then it's not even necessarily piggybacking off models we know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new model. Like
Mm-hmm.
I kept thinking, okay, maybe it's like an
Um,
accelerated version of a co-op, but it's
no,
not. It seems like its own kind of structure and its own entity. So really don't assume you know anything about it and how
exactly.
it works.
100%. Yeah, these are these new business models that, I mean, listen, I think are quite frankly capitalizing on the anxiety of home ownership. They're kind of making the home ownership worse by basically cannibalizing our housing stock. They're kind of preying on these sentiments you talked about, people feeling they need to get on the ladder or they're forever going to be left behind, and probably getting into contracts that maybe are not the best, that protect the tenants' rights or the co-owners' rights.
So I guess, Yara, thank you for a very important question. We can appreciate that you may not have the funds for legal review, but honestly, buying something like this without those funds
Mm-hmm.
is, it just sounds like no. The answer is please don't do it.
Yeah.
You need a severe review of whatever you're getting into. You need to deeply understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And if your resources, the same resources that keep you off the property market, keep you from doing that legal review, then maybe think about going
Mm-hmm.
back, maybe talking to a financial planner
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how you can get into a better situation. But it seems to me that foregoing that could land you in a lot more trouble
Yeah, 100%.
uh, than staying a renter and maybe looking at other options.
Yeah.
Would you say that's fair, John?
Yeah,
I'm
100%.
feeling for Yara
Absolutely.
personally. I'm like,
I
I've
wouldn't
been
do
in
it.
this position and I've had some of the same fears of missing out. I have to be
Yeah.
honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was super interesting. We will cover this I want to reassure all our listeners in more depth because as I find, John, a lot of housing advocates are now advocating all kinds of models that
Mm-hmm.
they say are going to solve our problems.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me that on the consumer side, when you actually see an expansion of kind of product offering, like it sounds great,
Yeah.
like fourplexes and buy with your family and do this
Yeah.
and do that. Like that's a way out of this Canadian housing crisis.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, as consumers buying into these products or newer arrangements that we haven't seen a lot,
Yeah.
it
Exactly.
seems to me that it's too easy for me to make the assumption that I get it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just like that co-op down the street that my
Mm-hmm.
friends lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit dangerous. Like
It
these are
is.
not all the same.
Exactly.
And in a time where we're trying to expand our supply so quickly in such creative ways and everyone's throwing everything at it,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like our need to be more cautious is there greater than ever,
Yeah.
actually.
100%.
All right. Well, so thank you to all of our audience for your amazing questions. Like
Yeah.
people sometimes think on advice shows people make them up, but I don't think I'd have the skill to make up these
No,
questions. These are real
well,
situations across the GTA. Thank you for sharing them with us so that other people can get the benefit
yeah,
of
exactly.
learning from these situations. That's actually, you're doing such a great service. So keep emailing them in. If you have a situation that is more particular, and you sometimes hear John say, well, I don't know Coburg or I don't know that marketer. It's not that real estate agents don't necessarily get into the depths, John, but they would do that on a client
Yeah.
by client basis. That's when you'd really start to dig. So if you have a more personal question, our show notes will have John's contact details. So that might be another way to get in touch. And I think other than that, all that's left for me to do is to thank you, to tell you you can reach John Pasalis on X Twitter. Our show is at Move Smartly. And to ask you to please join us again next week. Next week, what do we have coming up, John?
I don't know. We'll figure it out. I think it's our live Market update. No, that's our
I
roundtable.
set you up. Oh, it might be roundtable time with our favorite pal out in Steve out in Vancouver. Whatever it is, I think you will find it useful. So we hope to have you join us then. Thank you.
Until next time.